The pale morning light, filtered through the kitchen window's lace curtain, cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Mary Henderson sat at the small, round table, a chipped mug warming her hands. The acceptance letter lay before her, the college's embossed logo a stark black against the creamy paper. It felt strangely heavy, a weight not of paper, but of expectation, of a future yet unwritten. A nervous flutter danced in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't felt since high school. She traced the outline of the logo with her fingertip, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It was a risk, she knew. Her children had been less than encouraging. "Mom, you barely finished high school," Sarah, her eldest, had said, her voice laced with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "College is for young people." The words echoed in Mary's mind, sharp and dismissive, a small pinprick to the fragile balloon of her dreams. Young people. The phrase felt like a brand, marking her as an outsider, an anomaly in a world of bright-eyed, ambitious youths. But what did age really mean, she wondered, if not a measure of time passed? Did it negate the yearning within, the quiet fire that had flickered within her for years? She took a sip of the lukewarm tea, the familiar bitterness strangely comforting. The kitchen, small and cluttered, held the echoes of a life lived, a life shared. Tom's worn armchair sat by the window, a silent testament to his presence, a presence she still felt, a warmth that lingered even in his absence. He had always believed in her, seen something in her that others, even she herself, sometimes struggled to grasp. "You've got a gift with numbers, Mary," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with pride as she balanced the household accounts down to the last penny. His words, though simple, held an unwavering faith, a faith that now, in the quiet of the morning, gave her strength. Mrs. Patterson, her neighbor, had been more supportive, her voice a comforting balm against her children's doubts. "Mary, honey, if you don't try now, when will you?" she had asked, her hand squeezing Mary's. The question had resonated deeply, a gentle nudge toward a future she had almost resigned herself to never having. "When will you?" The words echoed in her mind, not as a challenge, but as a gentle invitation. Mary closed her eyes, the acceptance letter still beneath her fingertips. The scent of toast and coffee still lingered in the air, a familiar comfort, a grounding sensation in the whirlwind of her thoughts. She recalled her childhood, the way numbers seemed to dance before her eyes, forming patterns and equations with an almost magical clarity. It wasn't just calculation, it was understanding, an intuitive grasp of the language of mathematics. In school, she'd often solved problems in ways that baffled her teachers, reaching the correct answer through unconventional, seemingly illogical paths. But her unconventional methods were often met with skepticism, dismissed as mere luck, a fluke of nature. She had learned to suppress her intuitive leaps, to conform to the rigid structures of traditional mathematical thinking. Now, years later, the memory of that innate ability resurfaced, a dormant seed beginning to sprout. She felt a renewed surge of excitement, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The years of raising a family, of supporting Tom through his illness, had taken their toll, leaving her feeling depleted, adrift. But now, the familiar thrill of mathematical exploration beckoned, a beacon in the fog of uncertainty. The doubts lingered, of course, whispers in the back of her mind. "You're too old. You'll be out of your depth. They'll laugh at you." But these doubts, once powerful, now seemed strangely insignificant, like shadows retreating before the dawn. She opened her eyes, her gaze settling on a framed photograph on the kitchen counter. It was a picture of Tom, taken on their last family vacation. His smile, warm and reassuring, seemed to radiate a quiet strength. "Do it for yourself, Mary," he seemed to say. "Do it for the dreams we shared." A deep breath filled her lungs, pushing away the last vestiges of doubt. The flutter in her stomach subsided, replaced by a quiet determination, a sense of unwavering resolve. The acceptance letter no longer felt heavy, but light, a promise held gently in her hand. The kitchen, once a repository of memories, now felt like a launching pad, a place where a new chapter was about to begin. The morning sun, streaming through the window, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny spark of possibility. She stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor, a small, decisive sound in the quiet house. It was time. The chipped ceramic mug warmed her hands. The lukewarm tea, a pale imitation of the comforting brews Tom used to make. He'd always known how to coax the perfect amber color from the leaves, a secret she'd never quite mastered. Just like he'd known how to coax the anxieties from her heart, leaving behind a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed. The memory of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, flickered through her mind, a phantom warmth against the chill of the early morning air. Outside, the familiar suburban landscape blurred past manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, the occasional flash of a brightly colored child's toy abandoned on a porch. Each detail, mundane as it was, felt strangely poignant, a reminder of the life she'd built, the life she'd thought would last forever. The car rumbled beneath her, a low, comforting vibration that anchored her to the present. The community college wasn't far now. A knot tightened in her stomach, a mixture of anticipation and dread. It had been so long since she'd been in a classroom, so long since she'd dared to entertain the dormant embers of her own ambition. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the years had dulled the sharp edge of her mind, leaving her struggling to keep up with the younger students? The thought, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at her confidence. They'd look at her, this middle-aged woman with her sensible car and her slightly too long skirt, and they'd see a relic, a has-been. A wave of self-doubt washed over her, cold and unsettling. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. A sigh escaped her lips, a thin, reedy sound lost in the hum of the engine. Tom wouldn't want her to give up now. He'd always believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. "You've got a gift with numbers, Mary," he'd say, his voice a low rumble, full of conviction. "Someday you'll show the world." His words echoed in her mind, a quiet reassurance against the rising tide of her fear. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of his voice wash over her, a soothing balm against the raw edges of her anxiety. The college entrance loomed ahead, a grand archway of brick and stone, a portal to a world she'd almost convinced herself was no longer hers. Her foot hesitated on the accelerator. A fleeting urge to turn around, to retreat back to the familiar comfort of her quiet, empty house, pulsed through her. But then another memory surfaced, sharper, more insistent. It was Tom, his eyes shining with pride, handing her the acceptance letter from the college. "This is your time, Mary," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't let it pass you by." The memory solidified her resolve, a steel rod against the wavering fabric of her doubt. She pressed down on the accelerator, the car surging forward, carrying her through the archway and into the bustling heart of the campus. Students thronged the walkways, a vibrant tapestry of youthful energy. Their laughter, their hurried conversations, their casual confidence, it all felt both exhilarating and alien. She parked the car, her hand still trembling slightly, and took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers hung in the air, a subtle fragrance that momentarily distracted her from the churning turmoil within. She opened the car door and stepped out, the morning sun warm on her face. For a fleeting moment, the anxiety receded, replaced by a strange sense of calm. She walked towards the mathematics building, her steps slow but deliberate. Each footfall felt like a small victory, a reaffirmation of her purpose. The building itself was imposing, a stark, modern structure of glass and steel, a testament to the cold logic of the discipline it housed. As she entered the cool, echoing lobby, a fresh wave of apprehension washed over her. She could hear the murmur of voices from the classrooms, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a professor's chalk on a blackboard. the rustle of papers being shuffled. These were the sounds of academia, sounds she hadn't heard in decades, sounds that both intrigued and intimidated her. She glanced at her reflection in the polished glass doors of a nearby classroom. A middle-aged woman stared back at her, her eyes a little wider than usual, her lips pressed together in a thin line. Was this really her? Could she really do this? The question hung in the air, unanswered. But then, beneath the surface of her apprehension, a flicker of something else ignited. It was a spark of defiance, a refusal to be defined by her age, by her circumstances, by the doubts of others. It was the same spark that had driven her to apply to the college in the first place, the same spark that had sustained her through the long, lonely nights after Tom's passing. It was the spark of her own quiet, unwavering ambition. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her skirt, and walked towards the classroom, her steps now firm and resolute. The knot in her stomach hadn't entirely disappeared, but it had loosened, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. She was here, and she wasn't backing down. The world, and its numbers, awaited. The crisp morning air, tinged with the scent of damp earth and overbrewed coffee, did little to soothe the knot in Mary Henderson's stomach. Riverside Community College campus sprawled before her, a dizzying labyrinth of brick buildings and crisscrossing pathways teeming with students. They moved with a youthful energy that felt alien to her, their laughter echoing like a foreign language. Each hurried step, each casual toss of a backpack, seemed to underscore the chasm that separated her from this world. 42, she thought, the number catching like a bird her mind. 42 years old and back in school. A wry smile touched her lips. Tom would have chuckled, that deep rumble in his chest that always made her feel safe. "Go get him, Mary," he'd have said, his eyes twinkling with that familiar blend of pride and amusement. The memory, though comforting, did little to quell the rising tide of self-doubt. The weight of her course catalog felt heavy in her hands, the crisp pages a physical manifestation of the daunting task ahead. Each course title Calculus 2, Linear Algebra, Introduction to Number Theory seemed to mock her with their complexity, whispering of theorems and equations she hadn't encountered in decades. A tremor of fear ran through her. What if I can't keep up? What if I'm not smart enough? The thought was a sharp pang, a betrayal of the quiet confidence she'd carefully nurtured since Tom's passing. It was his unwavering belief in her, his insistence that she pursue her long-dormant passion for mathematics, that had propelled her here. Now, surrounded by the vibrant pulse of a generation she barely understood, she felt exposed, vulnerable. She found her English class tucked away in a small, dimly lit lecture hall. The air inside was stale, thick with the murmur of conversations and the rustle of papers. As she navigated the narrow aisle, searching for a seat, she felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over her. The students, mostly in their late teens and early 20s, seemed impossibly young, their faces unlined and brimming with a carefree confidence she hadn't felt in years. Their glances, fleeting and curious, felt like tiny pinpricks, probing her presence, questioning her place in their world. Mary chose a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the anonymity of the lecture hall shadows. She pulled out her notebook and pen, the familiar ritual of small comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. As the professor began the lecture, Mary found herself struggling to concentrate. The words seemed to drift past her, lost in the cacophony of her own internal monologue. Am I making a mistake? Should I be here? The question echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat against the rhythm of the lecture. A sudden burst of laughter from a nearby group of students jolted her back to the present. Their voices, hushed but sharp, carried through the quiet hum of the lecture hall. "Did you see that older woman in our English class?" a girl whispered, her tone laced with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Mary's heart tightened in her chest. "They're talking about me," she realized, the thought a cold fist clenching around her stomach. "Yeah," another voice chimed in, a male voice tinged with arrogance. "Shouldn't she be taking care of grandkids? Or something?" The words, though seemingly innocuous, struck Mary with the force of a physical blow. A wave of heat flushed her cheeks, and her hands, gripping her pen, trembled slightly. The carefully constructed wall of composure she'd built around herself began to crumble, brick by painstaking brick. Grandkids, she thought, the word echoing in the hollow chambers of her heart. Tom had always wanted grandchildren. The image of his face, etched with lines of weariness and pain in his final days, flashed before her eyes. The sting of grief, sharp and unexpected, pierced the veil of her composure. She fought back the urge to turn around, to confront the students with the raw, jagged edges of her loss. What would they understand? She thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. They, with their untarnished futures stretching before them, couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of her life, the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd deferred. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, willing herself to regain control. Tom wouldn't want me to give up, she reminded herself, the thought a fragile shield against the rising tide of discouragement. He'd always encouraged her to embrace challenges, to push beyond the boundaries of her comfort zone. The professor's voice, droning on about the intricacies of sentence structure, faded into the background as Mary wrestled with her emotions. The knot in her stomach tightened, a physical manifestation of the battle raging within her. They're wrong, she thought, a flicker of defiance igniting in her chest. They don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of. The thought, though small, was a seed of resilience planted in the fertile ground of her determination. It was a quiet promise, whispered to herself, to prove them wrong, to show them that age and circumstance were not limitations, but rather the crucible in which strength and wisdom were forged. The lecture continued, the professor's words washing over her like a distant wave. But Mary no longer heard them. She was lost in her own world, a world of numbers and equations, a world where she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. The discouragement remained, a dull ache in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. She would not let their ignorance define her. She would not let their mockery deter her. She was here to learn, to grow, to reclaim a part of herself she'd long thought lost. And she would not be swayed. The faint scent of formaldehyde, a ghost of high school biology labs long past, clung to the air. Mary inhaled deeply, a strange comfort in the familiar sterile smell. She found herself unexpectedly enjoying the lecture on cellular respiration, the intricate dance of molecules within the microscopic world mirroring the complex equations she loved to unravel. The professor, a young woman with bright, inquisitive eyes, paced the front of the room, her voice a steady rhythm against the backdrop of furiously scribbling pens. Mary's own hand moved almost automatically, transcribing notes with a neatness she hadn't realized she still possessed. Years of grocery lists and appointment reminders had not dulled her ingrained academic habits. A small, hesitant smile touched her lips. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all. A question hung in the air, a complex query about the Krebs cycle. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Mary's mind raced, the diagrams and explanations from the textbook flashing through her thoughts. She hesitated, a familiar wave of self-doubt washing over her. What if she was wrong? What if she made a fool of herself in front of all these young, bright minds? The image of Jennifer's condescending smirk from the math class flashed through her mind, a sharp pang of anxiety tightening her chest. But then, another image surfaced: Tom's gentle smile, his unwavering belief in her. "You've got this, Mary," he seemed to whisper, his voice echoing in the chambers of her heart. Taking a deep breath, Mary raised her hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. The professor's gaze landed on her, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Yes?" she prompted, a hint of encouragement in her tone. Mary answered, her voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength as she explained the intricate process. The words flowed, each one a precise piece of the puzzle falling into place. A hush fell over the classroom, the other students turning to stare at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. When she finished, the professor beamed, a genuine smile illuminating her face. "Excellent, Miss Henderson. A perfect explanation." A warm glow spread through Mary's chest, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over her. For a moment, she forgot the years of self-doubt, the whispers of inadequacy that had haunted her for so long. She was simply a student, learning, understanding, and contributing. This was what she had craved, this intellectual stimulation, this sense of belonging. But the feeling was fleeting. As the class dispersed, the chatter and laughter of the other students echoing around her, Mary found herself alone once again. The cafeteria, a cacophony of clanging trays and boisterous conversations, felt like an alien landscape. She found a quiet corner table, her tray laden with a simple salad and a cup of lukewarm coffee. The aroma of greasy pizza and burgers hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the biology lab. She ate slowly, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in her coffee, her thoughts drifting back to Tom. He would have been so proud of her, his eyes twinkling with amusement at her newfound academic adventures. A wave of sadness washed over her, the familiar ache of his absence, a constant presence in her life. He would have known how to navigate this strange new world, how to bridge the gap between her and these younger students. He would have made her laugh, his easy charm disarming even the most skeptical of her classmates. The loneliness pressed in on her, a heavy weight on her chest. The success in biology, the fleeting sense of belonging, felt distant now, a mirage in the desert of her isolation. She watched the other students, their animated conversations and easy camaraderie a stark reminder of her own outsider status. They spoke a different language, their world a tapestry woven with social media trends and pop culture references she couldn't decipher. She felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe, her notebook filled with observations but lacking the key to truly understanding their culture. A group of students from her math class, Jennifer among them, walked past her table, their laughter echoing in the cavernous space. Jennifer glanced at Mary, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Was it pity? Disdain? Mary couldn't tell. She quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks burning with shame. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her every move scrutinized and judged. The weight of their unspoken judgment, the invisible barrier that separated her from them, felt almost tangible. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, a bitter taste lingering on her tongue. The cafeteria, once a symbol of community and connection, now felt like a prison, each table a separate island of belonging she couldn't reach. She gathered her things, her movements slow and deliberate, a quiet defiance against the wave of loneliness threatening to engulf her. She had faced greater challenges than this, she reminded herself. She had navigated the labyrinth of grief, the complexities of single motherhood, the endless practicalities of survival. This was just another equation to solve, another unknown to unravel. She would find her way, she would find her place, even in this strange, unfamiliar world. The memory of Tom's steady hand in hers, the echo of his unwavering belief in her, fueled her resolve. She wasn't alone, not really. She carried his love, his support, within her, a silent strength that would guide her through the labyrinth of this new beginning. The afternoon sun cast long, rectangular shadows across the linoleum floor of room 237, striping the worn desks in alternating bands of light and dark. The air, thick with the scent of chalk dust and stale coffee, hummed with a low, nervous energy. Professor Richardson, a man whose tweed jacket seemed perpetually rumpled, paced before the whiteboard. His marker squeaked, a sound that grated on Mary's nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. Each equation he scrawled felt like another knot tightening in her stomach. She hadn't realized how much this class, this return to academia, had come to mean. Not just the pursuit of knowledge, but the quiet, almost defiant reclamation of a self she thought she'd lost somewhere between late-night feedings and balancing the family budget. And so, Professor Richardson declared, his voice echoing slightly in the mostly empty lecture hall, we arrive at the crux of the matter. This, my friends, is what mathematicians have been grappling with for decades. He tapped the board with his marker, a flourish that seemed almost theatrical to Mary. The equation, a jumble of Greek letters and mathematical symbols, seemed to mock her, a stark reminder of all the years she'd spent away from the world of numbers. A wave of self-doubt washed over her. Was she foolish to think she could keep up, to compete with these bright young minds? A ripple of murmurs went through the class. Jennifer, the impeccably dressed student who always sat in the front row, leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. Mark, the perpetually smirking student who seemed to derive an almost perverse pleasure from pointing out others' mistakes, let out a low whistle. Ashley, whose designer handbag cost more than Mary's entire semester's tuition, tapped manicured nails against her phone, a bored expression on her face. Mary felt a prickle of resentment. They treated this like a game, a puzzle to be solved for the sake of intellectual vanity. For her, it was different. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about reconnecting with a part of herself she'd almost forgotten. Professor Richardson continued, his voice taking on a reverent tone. This equation, in its elegant simplicity, represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of. He trailed off, lost in the labyrinthine complexities of the mathematical world. Mary, however, found her gaze fixed on the equation. It wasn't just a collection of symbols to her. It was a language, a story waiting to be told. As the professor droned on about the impossibility of a solution, Mary's mind began to work, quietly, almost subconsciously. She saw the numbers not as static entities, but as dynamic forces, interacting, shifting, dancing in her mind's eye. The initial wave of intimidation receded, replaced by a slow, creeping sense of familiarity. It was the same feeling she used to get when balancing her household accounts, making every penny stretch to cover the bills, the groceries, the occasional small indulgence for her children. It was the feeling of finding order in chaos, of weaving a tapestry of logic from seemingly disparate threads. She saw patterns emerging from the equation, hidden symmetries that others seemed to have missed. The symbols began to rearrange themselves in her mind, falling into place like pieces of a complex jigsaw puzzle. She saw the solution, not as a single, definitive answer, but as a series of interconnected steps, a delicate dance of logic and intuition. A nervous flutter erupted in her chest. Could it be? Could she really have seen something that the others, the professor himself, had overlooked? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She glanced around the room, at the furrowed brows, the whispered consultations, the air thick with intellectual struggle. She felt a pang of empathy for them, for their struggle to grasp something that seemed to come so naturally to her. So, Professor Richardson concluded, a hint of challenge in his voice. Can anyone offer even a tentative approach to this conundrum? Silence hung heavy in the air. Mary hesitated. Years of being relegated to the sidelines, of having her opinions dismissed, her intellect underestimated, held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she made a fool of herself in front of all these bright young minds? But then a memory surfaced. Her late husband, Tom, his hand resting on hers, his voice warm and encouraging. Never be afraid to let your light shine, Mary, he'd said. You have a gift, a way of seeing the world that others don't. Don't hide it. The memory, sharp and clear, sent a wave of warmth through her. Tom's belief in her, even now, gave her the courage she needed. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she raised it. The movement, small and hesitant, seemed to ripple through the room, breaking the spell of collective frustration. All eyes turned to her, a mixture of surprise and skepticism in their gaze. Jennifer's perfectly arched eyebrows rose in amusement. Mark's smirk widened, a silent challenge in his eyes. Ashley barely glanced up from her phone. Professor Richardson, however, seemed genuinely surprised. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Do you have something to add?" Mary's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. But as she looked at the equation on the board, the fear began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of certainty. "Yes, Professor," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I believe I do." The afternoon sun, a hazy rectangle of pale gold, lay across the worn linoleum floor of room 237. Dust motes danced in its lazy warmth, a silent, swirling ballet against the backdrop of Professor Richardson's droning voice. Mary Henderson, perched on the edge of her hard plastic chair, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. He'd written it. The impossible equation. The one he'd claimed, with a hint of a smirk, had stumped mathematicians for decades. It loomed on the whiteboard, a menacing fortress of Greek symbols and complex variables. Her classmates, a sea of youthful indifference, shifted restlessly. Some doodled in their notebooks, others scrolled through their phones. Jennifer, the perpetually top-scoring student, tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against her textbook, a rhythmic counterpoint to the professor's lecture. Mark, slouched low in his chair, wore an expression of bored arrogance. And Ashley, her expensive designer bag strategically placed on the desk beside her, whispered something to the girl next to her, a subtle ripple of laughter following. Mary felt a prickle of insecurity. She was older, a world away from their casual confidence and easy camaraderie. What was she doing here? This was folly, a midlife delusion. You belong at home, Mary, not in a classroom full of kids. The thought echoed the doubts that had plagued her for weeks. Yet, beneath the anxiety, a quiet ember of defiance flickered. Tom would have wanted her to do this. He'd always encouraged her passion for numbers, the strange, intuitive way she saw patterns where others saw chaos. So, Professor Richardson clapped his hands together, breaking the spell of the equation. As I said, this is more of a thought experiment. Something to ponder. I doubt anyone here, his gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Mary. The pause, subtle as it was, felt loaded with unspoken dismissal. Could even begin to approach a solution. The knot in Mary's stomach twisted tighter, but this time it was different. It wasn't entirely fear. It was anticipation. Something about the elegant complexity of the equation called to her. It whispered secrets, a language she instinctively understood. "I think I can solve it," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the rustling of papers. A wave of silence rippled through the room. Jennifer's perfectly arched eyebrow climbed higher. Mark snorted, a sound of blatant disbelief. Ashley's whisper turned into a barely contained giggle. Mary's cheeks flushed, a wave of heat creeping up her neck. She wanted to shrink back, to disappear into the anonymity of the lecture hall. But then, she remembered Tom's voice, gentle and encouraging. "Don't let anyone dim your light, Mary." She straightened her spine, her gaze fixed on the whiteboard. Professor Richardson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Henderson, is it? I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this problem," he trailed off, his expression a mix of amusement and pity. Mary ignored him. She stood, walked to the board, and picked up a marker. The plastic felt cool and smooth against her skin. The classroom, the mocking whispers, the professor's condescending smile, it all faded away. There was only the equation, a complex tapestry woven with numbers and symbols. And she held the thread. 17 seconds. That's all it took. 17 seconds to unravel the intricate knot, to write the solution with a steady hand, each stroke precise and unwavering. 17 seconds that shattered the quiet hum of the classroom, replacing it with stunned silence. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint whir of the air conditioning. Mary placed the marker back on the tray, the click echoing in the sudden stillness. She turned to face the room, her heart pounding against her ribs. Jennifer's jaw hung slack. Mark's eyes were wide, his usual arrogance replaced by bewildered confusion. Ashley's giggle had died in her throat, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Professor Richardson stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his gaze fixed on the whiteboard. He blinked, then blinked again, as if trying to clear some unseen obstruction from his vision. He walked slowly to the board, his steps measured and deliberate. He traced the lines of Mary's solution with a trembling finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the professor's quiet murmurings as he worked through her calculations. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting Mary's. The amusement, the pity, it was all gone, replaced by a profound, almost reverent awe. "How did you do that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Mary took a deep breath, the knot in her stomach finally loosening. "I saw the patterns," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "The relationships between the variables. It had just came to me." He shook his head, a slow, disbelieving gesture. But the elliptical function, the nested radicals, Mary's mind raced. Explaining her process, translating the intuitive leaps of her mind into the rigid language of academia, felt strangely difficult. It's like music," she fumbled, searching for the right words. "You hear the notes, but it's the spaces between them that create the melody. The silence is just as important as the sound." Professor Richardson stared at her, his expression a complex mixture of wonder and incomprehension. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, shaking his head slightly as if the words he sought eluded him. The spell was broken by a cough from the back of the room. Slowly, the other students began to stir, their whispers filling the silence like the returning tide. But the whispers were different now. The mockery was gone, replaced by a hushed reverence, a dawning awareness that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that challenged their assumptions, their preconceived notions about intelligence, about age, about the very nature of knowledge itself. Mary felt a quiet sense of triumph, a deep, unwavering certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The afternoon sun, filtering through the dusty window pane, seemed to glow a little brighter, illuminating not just the room, but a new path, a new chapter in her life. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence, a peaceful sense of accomplishment. Tom would have been proud. The fluorescent lights of room 237 hummed, a monotonous counterpoint to the silence that had descended. Chalk dust still hung in the air, a spectral residue of the equation that had moments before seemed insurmountable. Professor Richardson stood at the blackboard, his gaze fixed on Mary's solution, a complex tapestry of symbols and logic woven with an almost impossible elegance. He traced a finger along a line of the proof, his mind retracing the steps, each connection clicking into place with the chilling precision of a lock mechanism. He had presented this problem, a notorious unsolved conjecture within the field, as a thought experiment, a way to illustrate the limits of current mathematical understanding. He hadn't expected an answer, certainly not from a returning student. His initial skepticism, a reflex born from years in academia, had been swiftly and ruthlessly dismantled. "It's perfect," he thought, a tremor of awe running through him. Elegant, intuitive. He'd spent weeks wrestling with this problem, his mind snagged on the thorns of conventional thinking. Mary, in a matter of minutes, had navigated the labyrinth with an almost preternatural grace. Across the room, Mary sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart beating a quiet rhythm against her ribs. The silence wasn't oppressive. It felt like a held breath, a moment suspended between disbelief and acceptance. She had felt the solution unfold in her mind, a quiet whisper of numbers and patterns emerging from the depths of her intuition. It wasn't a conscious process, more like remembering something she had always known. Now, as the professor's silence stretched, a flicker of doubt touched her. What if I made a mistake? The thought was a cold finger tracing down her spine. What if it's all wrong? Jennifer, usually the most vocal student in the class, sat frozen, her meticulously crafted notes forgotten in her lap. The smug confidence that usually radiated from her had been replaced by a stunned bewilderment. She had scoffed at Mary's presence in the class, an older woman amidst the ambitious young minds, a relic of a different era. Now, the foundations of her carefully constructed academic hierarchy were crumbling. How could she how? She thought, the question echoing in the hollow space of her disbelief. It's not possible. Mark, who had initially dismissed Mary as a well-meaning but ultimately out-of-her-depth housewife, stared at the board, his jaw slack. He prided himself on his quick grasp of complex concepts, his ability to dissect and analyze problems with ruthless efficiency. Mary's solution, however, bypassed the intricate machinery of his analytical mind, appealing to something deeper, something he couldn't quite grasp. A strange mixture of admiration and resentment churned within him. I should have seen it, he thought, his competitive spirit rearing its head. There must be a trick, a shortcut I missed. Ashley, whose academic lineage traced back generations of esteemed mathematicians, felt a chill creep up her arms. She had viewed mathematics as an inherited right, a domain where her pedigree granted her an unquestioned advantage. Mary's achievement, however, shattered this illusion of effortless superiority. It wasn't about lineage, it was about raw, untamed talent. It's not fair, she thought, the familiar sting of envy twisting in her gut. She shouldn't be able to do this. The silence stretched, taut, and vibrating with unspoken emotions. Finally, Professor Richardson cleared his throat, the sound breaking the spell. "Remarkable," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Truly remarkable." He turned to face the class, his eyes bright with a renewed sense of wonder. "Mrs. Henderson," he addressed Mary, his voice regaining its usual academic timbre, but now laced with a newfound respect. "Your solution is not just correct, it's insightful. It's elegant. It's a completely novel approach, one that eluded even the most prominent minds in our field." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You've essentially rewritten a chapter of mathematical theory." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Jennifer, Mark, and Ashley exchanged glances, their faces etched with a complex mix of awe and shame. The realization of their prejudice, their quick dismissal of Mary based on superficial assumptions, settled upon them like a heavy cloak. Mary, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and quiet pride, offered a small smile. "I just saw it," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom would have been so proud, she thought, a wave of bittersweet warmth washing over her. His memory, his unwavering belief in her, had been her constant companion throughout this journey. Jennifer, unable to contain her emotions any longer, blurted out, "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I was wrong about you." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed facade of arrogance crumbling to reveal a genuine remorse. Mark, echoing Jennifer's sentiment, mumbled, "Me too." It was incredible. He shook his head, still struggling to comprehend the sheer brilliance of Mary's solution. Ashley, her usual composure shaken, added, "I've never seen anything like it." The words were grudging, but laced with a reluctant admiration. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the initial tension replaced by a sense of shared wonder. Mary's achievement had transcended the confines of the classroom, becoming a testament to the power of an underestimated mind. It wasn't just a mathematical breakthrough. It was a human story, a story of perseverance, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of knowledge. The class, initially divided by age, experience, and prejudice, was now united by a shared experience, a profound lesson in humility and the boundless potential of the human intellect. Professor Richardson, watching his students grapple with these newfound realizations, felt a surge of hope. He had witnessed a mathematical miracle. Yes, but more importantly, he had witnessed the birth of understanding, the dismantling of prejudice, and the transformative power of a single, extraordinary mind. The equation on the board, now a symbol of Mary's triumph, seemed to glow with a soft, almost ethereal light. It wasn't just a solution. It was a beacon, illuminating the path toward a more inclusive, more intuitive understanding of the world and of ourselves. The whispers started subtly, like the rustling of leaves before a storm. A murmur in the cafeteria, a hushed conversation in the library, a sideways glance in the hallway. Mary Henderson, the woman who solved the unsolvable, the middle-aged mother who returned to school and conquered the impossible. The story, embellished with each retelling, took on a life of its own. Mary, initially oblivious, felt the change in the air, a subtle shift in the way people looked at her. It wasn't the open mockery she'd faced before, but something different. A mixture of awe, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of envy. She recalled Tom's gentle encouragement, his unwavering belief in her. He always knew, she thought, a familiar pang of bittersweetness echoing in her chest. He always saw more in me than I saw in myself. She ran her fingers over the worn cover of her textbook, the familiar texture grounding her in the present. The ripple effect of Mary's achievement extended far beyond the confines of Professor Richardson's advanced mathematics class. The local newspaper ran a story about her, painting her as a symbol of lifelong learning and the untapped potential within seemingly ordinary individuals. Mary, sitting stiffly in her living room as the young reporter peppered her with questions, felt a strange disconnect. It wasn't anything special, she'd mumbled, her cheeks burning under the unfamiliar scrutiny. Internally, a storm of emotions raged. Pride warred with humility. Disbelief wrestled with quiet satisfaction. Just a simple equation, she thought. Why all the fuss? The reporter, however, saw a different narrative, a story of triumph against the odds. The campus newspaper followed suit, publishing an in-depth piece on Mary's journey, highlighting the systemic biases older students often faced. Jennifer, Mark, and Ashley, reading the article in stunned silence, found themselves reevaluating their own perceptions. Jennifer, the perpetually high-achieving student, felt a pang of guilt. She'd initially dismissed Mary as a distraction, a woman out of her depth. Now, she saw a reflection of her own future, a reminder that learning wasn't confined to youth. What if I burn out? What if I lose my edge? The thought, unsettling yet compelling, pushed her to approach Mary after class, a tentative apology forming on her lips. Mark, the arrogant prodigy, grappled with a bruised ego. He'd seen Mary as a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. Her quiet competence, however, had shattered his carefully constructed image of intellectual superiority. He recognized a depth of understanding in her, an intuitive grasp of mathematics that transcended his rote memorization and formulaic approach. Maybe there's more to it than just being the smartest guy in the room, he mused, the realization both humbling and strangely liberating. Ashley, whose academic confidence stemmed largely from her family's legacy of academic excellence, saw in Mary a quiet defiance, a refusal to be defined by societal expectations. She didn't need a name, a pedigree, to prove herself, she realized, the thought echoing her own unspoken yearning for individual recognition. She started seeking out Mary in the library, drawn to her quiet confidence and unassuming brilliance. Professor Richardson, too, underwent a transformation. Mary's unconventional approach to problem-solving challenged his own rigid teaching methodologies. He realized the limitations of a purely theoretical approach, the importance of fostering intuition and individual exploration. He began incorporating more open-ended problems into his curriculum, encouraging students to explore different avenues of thought. His lectures, once dry recitations of theorems and formulas, became interactive discussions filled with lively debates and collaborative problem-solving. Mathematics, he announced to his class one afternoon, his voice resonating with newfound conviction, is not simply a collection of rules and formulas. It's a language, a way of thinking, a tool for understanding the universe. He paused, his gaze settling on Mary, who sat quietly in the front row, a faint smile playing on her lips. And sometimes, he continued, the most profound insights come from the most unexpected places. Weeks bled into months. Mary, navigating the unfamiliar terrain of academic recognition, found herself presenting her work at conferences, her name appearing in academic journals. The whispers evolved into open admiration. She became a mentor to other non-traditional students, a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of the human mind. Graduation day arrived, a bittersweet culmination of a journey that had changed not only Mary's life, but the very fabric of the college itself. As she walked across the stage, her gown billowing around her, she felt a profound sense of peace. She wasn't just Mary Henderson, the middle-aged housewife. She was Mary Henderson, the mathematician, the scholar, the woman who dared to dream. The applause, thunderous and sustained, washed over her, a symphony of acceptance and admiration. She clutched her diploma, the embossed lettering a testament to her hard work and dedication. This was not the end, she knew. It was a beginning. She had been accepted to the state university, a new challenge beckoning on the horizon. A faint smile played on her lips. Tom would have been proud. And somewhere, in the quiet recesses of her heart, she knew he was. Years spun by, leaving behind the echo of a quiet triumph in a forgotten classroom. The world outside continued its relentless march, oblivious to the subtle shifts occurring within the hallowed halls of academia. Jennifer, once the embodiment of relentless ambition, now stood before a room full of eager faces, a gentle confidence radiating from her. Gone was the sharp edge of competition, replaced by a warmth that invited collaboration. Her lectures weren't merely recitations of theorems and proofs. They were explorations, journeys into the heart of mathematical thinking. She encouraged questions, not as a test of knowledge, but as a springboard for deeper understanding. It's not about finding the answer, she would often say, her voice echoing the sentiment of a woman she'd once underestimated. It's about understanding the question. Internally, a quiet satisfaction bloomed. She remembered the sting of inadequacy she'd felt in Mary's presence, a feeling that had initially fueled her resentment, but later ignited a spark of genuine curiosity. It was a curiosity that had led her not just to academic success, but to a profound appreciation for the beauty and elegance of mathematics, a beauty that transcended mere equations. Mark, the former prodigy, no longer chased accolades with the ferocity of a starving wolf. The ephemeral satisfaction of topping the class had faded, replaced by a deeper hunger, a desire to unravel the mysteries of the universe. He'd traded the sterile environment of corporate research for the chaotic energy of a university lab, surrounded by a motley crew of graduate students who shared his passion. He'd learned, not from textbooks or lectures, but from the shared struggle, the collective pursuit of knowledge. It's about the process, not the product, he'd tell his students, his words a reflection of the lesson he'd learned from a woman who valued intuition over established methods. He'd once scoffed at Mary's unconventional approach, viewing it as a sign of ignorance. Now, he realized it was a testament to a mind that dared to see beyond the confines of the conventional. There was a humility in his approach now, a recognition that even the brightest minds could learn from the most unexpected sources. Ashley, once defined by her lineage and the weight of expectations, now stood at the helm of an educational reform initiative, challenging the very foundations of the system that had once shaped her. She discarded the gilded cage of privilege, embracing the messy, vibrant tapestry of public education. Her office, a far cry from the sterile elegance of her upbringing, was filled with the chaotic energy of brainstorming sessions, the passionate debates about curriculum, and the quiet determination to create a more inclusive and equitable learning environment. Everyone has the potential to learn, she'd argue, her voice resonating with a conviction born from witnessing the untapped brilliance of a woman dismissed by society. The memory of her initial disdain for Mary, a woman who didn't fit the mold of academic excellence she'd been taught to revere, now served as a constant reminder of the insidious nature of prejudice. It was a prejudice she was determined to dismantle, brick by painful brick. Professor Richardson, now a seasoned educator with silver threading through his temples, stood before his class, a familiar equation scrawled across the board. But the way he taught, the way he engaged with his students had undergone a profound transformation. He no longer prioritized rote memorization or the regurgitation of formulas. Instead, he encouraged exploration, experimentation, and the embrace of intuition. True understanding, he'd tell his students, his gaze sweeping across the room, comes not from knowing the answer, but from understanding the question. His words, once a mere philosophical musing, now carried the weight of experience, the echo of a lesson learned from a student who dared to challenge the very definition of intelligence. He often thought of Mary, the quiet woman who had walked into his classroom and unknowingly sparked a revolution, not just in his teaching methods, but in his understanding of what it meant to truly learn. The ripple effect of her actions, he realized, had extended far beyond the confines of that classroom, influencing not just individual lives, but the very fabric of education. In a world obsessed with quantifiable results and standardized tests, Mary's story served as a quiet reminder that true intelligence, true brilliance, often defied definition. It was a story about the power of an underestimated mind, a story about the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a story about the transformative potential of education when it embraced not just the intellect, but the human being. It was a story that whispered, not shouted, reminding everyone that the greatest discoveries often lay hidden, not in complex formulas or intricate theories, but in the quiet corners of the human mind, waiting to be unearthed.